All right, guys, today we're going to talk about carbohydrates. Okay, now carbohydrates, let's look at the word first because it's usually if we can look at the words, we can start seeing things, then it'll give us a hint of what they're made of or what they do. So if I look at the word, the first part of the word, carb, okay, so carbo is referring to carbon. And then the last part of this word, this is hydrate. So this is referring to water. And the three elements that carbohydrates are made up of, the first one is going to be carbon, which makes sense because you have to have carbon if you're an organic molecule. And then you're also made up of hydrogens and oxygens. Now, these three elements, they come in a really special ratio, one we have to memorize. They come in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. That means for every carbon, you're going to have the equal amount of oxygens. And that's really important, especially when we start identifying different molecules just based on their structure and by the way they look. So carbohydrates made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Now, if I talk about the monomer, remember monomers are single units. The monomers of carbohydrates are monosaccharides. And if we dissect this word, mono means one, and then saccharide is referring to sugar. So monosaccharides, these are one sugar. They're single things, which makes sense because when we start talking about polymers, so now that I have a polymer, my polymer would be a polysaccharide. Because poly means many, so many, and then saccharide means sugar. So polysaccharides are just many repeating units of those monosaccharides. Now monosaccharides, there's a couple special ones that I want us to know. The first one being glucose. In glucose, this is what I use for cell energy. The next monosaccharide is going to be galactose. And you guys probably haven't heard of this one before, but galactose is what the sugar is in breast milk, which kind of makes sense because right here where it's the lactose part, this is where we usually start thinking about milk. And then the third monosaccharide I want you guys to know is fructose. And fructose is the sugar you find in fruits. Now, a few things to notice about this. The first one being all of these end in the same suffix, or they all end in the same thing. They all end in ose. So glucose and fructose and galactose. So whenever we start looking at carbs, one of the things is that the suffix, or the thing it ends in, is always ose. So glucose, lactose, maltose, sucrose, all of these different sugars that you've heard the names of, they all end in ose. And so when you look at the name of something, if it ends in OSE, then you automatically know it's a sugar. Now going back to these monosaccharides up here, these monosaccharides, what I want you guys to see is that they're made of the same, obviously they're going to be the same three elements because all carbs have these, but they're all C6H12O6. They all have the exact same chemical formula. Glucose is C6H12O6, galactose C6H12O6, fructose C6H12O6. What differs between them is the fact that they are shaped differently, okay? So they have the same formula, but a different shape. And one of the things you guys need to start remembering in science is that form is always function. So if something is shaped a certain way, it is going to do a certain job. So even though these all have the same formula, C6H12O6, you can see that all of them have a different function. This one does cell energy. This is the sugar in breast milk. This is the sugar in fruits. And they all, yeah, they'll all end up kind of giving energy of some sort, but because they are a different shape, that means they're going to be in different things. Now, for examples, since we've already kind of talked about it, the examples of carbs, these are going to be my sugars, just so we have that written on our page somewhere. They're sugars. Now, my polysaccharides, there's a couple that I want us to know about this. Polysaccharide. We have a few famous ones of these as well. So a polysaccharide, this would be starch. And we'll talk about that one. This is going to be glycogen. And we'll talk about that one. And then the other one, which is cellulose. Now, starch, what it does, this is where fruits and plants, so I'll put plants, store their sugar. This is where plants store their sugar, because plants, sometimes they make too much sugar and they need that energy reserve to do something different. My glycogen, this is glucose that gets stored in our liver. Okay, so this is in our human body liver, which is actually pretty cool because you guys know that you eat sugar for energy. That is the function of all glucoses, of all carbs. If we want to talk about carbs function, it's to give us quick energy. Whenever you guys eat sugar, you get energy really, really fast, right? And we know that we need energy because you have to do body processes and all that kind of stuff. But you guys aren't eating all of the time. Like currently, you may not actually be eating something, but you are still living and all your cells are still doing their same job. That's because you have glucose stored in your body and it's stored in the liver. So when you guys eat too much sugar and your body doesn't need all of it, then it's going to store it away for later. That way, when you guys aren't eating, then your body can start to break it back down. And then I can get energy out of it again. And then our last one, cellulose, this is going to be found in plant cell walls. It helps with structure. This is also something that you guys can't digest. If you think about cellulose, like if you guys have eaten corn before, usually you see corn again when you go to the bathroom. That's because you can't digest those cell walls. And really, again, what it comes down to is the form or the structures of these. Okay? When you start getting them in big long chains, like let's talk about starch and cellulose. So cellulose looks something like this. Okay, I have a bunch of carbohydrate rings and they're attached to my oxygen. So there's another oxygen. I'll draw one more. There you go. This is what cellulose looks like, except it has some hydroxyl groups, but these hydroxyl groups, this is a rough representation. There's a few more things to it, but these hydroxyl groups are on opposite sides. Every other glucose monomer, every other monomer, this one, they're on opposite sides. We don't have an enzyme that can break those bonds up because it alternates. That's why we can't digest it. But if you look at starch, let's make starch this pretty color. Starch, again, looks pretty much the same. We have these glucose rings, and then they're attached right there. Whoops. There you go, looks like that. And then there you go, he looks like this, except now his hydroxyl groups, they're all on the same side. And guess what? We do have an enzyme that can digest that. That's why we can eat potatoes and fruits and such and get energy out of them, because we're able to break these bonds right here. We can't break those bonds up there. And then glycogen, so this was cellulose, just to make sure we're clear. This is going to be starch. Now the cool thing about glycogen, if we want to draw a picture of it, glycogen, again, has kind of the same structure. So we start looking at carbohydrate rings, etc., etc. But now, if I just drew them as lines, these things get branched, okay? So my glycogen is branched. And the reason it is because I want to use glycogen as an energy source. I want to use this as a quick energy. So the more branches I have, that means the more opportunities I have to break those bonds up, which will get my energy quicker or more quickly. All right, so let's build. Let's start with a monomer. Whoops. Let's start with a monomer, and then let's build a polymer. Now, think back to our other lectures. When I build something, that means I'm going to go through dehydration, synthesis, or condensation. And if I dehydrate something, that means I unwater it. I take water away. So let's start with a really easy carbohydrate ring. So here you go. So here's a carbohydrate ring, and maybe they have some hydroxyl groups because I have to have equal oxygens and carbons. Okay, so there's a carbohydrate ring. He looks fantastic. Let's do another hydroxyl group. Now what I want to do is I want to add him to another monosaccharide. So here's my guy. And then here's my OH. And then here's some OHs up here. And an OH right there. Awesome. So now what I want to do is I want to join this guy and this guy together. Well, what I have to look for every time are those hydroxyl groups. I'm always looking for this guy and something over here. But I need at least one hydroxyl group each time. Now what I'm going to do is, we talked about electronegativity. This oxygen is super duper negative, and this hydrogen is partially positive, and it's a really, really weak bond together. So when this oxygen starts coming around different molecules, he's going to be attracted to other parts. Would oxygen be attracted to the negative over here? No, because opposites are the sames. They don't attract to each other. But this oxygen is going to see this carbon over here. And when these two molecules get really close together, this oxygen, because he's negative, he's going to see this positively charged carbon, and he's going to want to hook up with him instead. Well, if he hooks up with him, that means the bond right here gets broken with the H. And then this bond right here gets broken with the OH. And if I add those two together, H and OH, that gives me H2O. So I just made water. And now that I've made water, I'm just going to join these two molecules together. So let's get my purple. So let's draw this first one again. He looked like that. He had a hydroxyl group. He had a hydroxyl group. He had a hydroxyl group here. But then this one right here, that oxygen broke apart from the hydrogen. The hydrogen left, that oxygen is still there. So there's my oxygen without the hydrogen. Now I get to add the other group to it. Well, look, that oxygen is attracted to this carbon. So he's going to hold hands with this guy over here. So I just draw the same molecule. It's like he's going to hold hands right there. I still have a hydroxyl group. I still have a hydroxyl group. I still have a hydroxyl group. So now, instead of having two sugars that are separated, I have two that are joined together. So this is a two-sugar molecule. This is a disaccharide. And this bond right here is actually very, very important. This has a special name. Every sugar, the bonds that hold them together, is held together by a glycosidic bond. glycosidic bond, which should start to sound familiar because glyc is referring to sugar. So this is my sugar bond. And then I can keep doing this process over and over and over again until I start making these big these big polysaccharides. So I can go from my monomers, like my glucose and my fructose and my sucrose up here, and then I can start building these big molecules over on this side. And so we've covered elements, we've covered the monomers, the polymers, functions, and how we can build them, and then the different forms that they take. There you go. Hope you guys are good.